Hello, hello, my friends. AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face and my card making space. Happy Stamptember. So, the Simon Says Stamptember release has gone live as of this video going live. I will have a link to that release in the description box below the video. For those that aren't aware, this Stamptember release is Simon brand products. The items will be restocked in the future, etc. This has nothing to do with the limited edition collabs. Videos for those will be coming very soon. We'll get into it. So I made a couple cards using some of the new release along with an oldie but goodie favorite. I got inky. I had fun with Distress Oxide inks and yeah, splattery, inky goodness. It's about the easiest way to describe it. Like always, I will link to everything I used in the description box below the video. My links are affiliate links. That just means that if you click on one of my links, end up placing an order, I get a little kickback from that at no extra cost to you. It's what helps pay the bills, keeps the channel going, etc. And yeah, let's get into making these cards. Okay, so I'm starting with some Distress Kraft Heavystock. This stuff is fun to play with. I haven't played with it in a while, and it can handle a lot of like inky, watery techniques. So I cut down a couple panels to A2 size, so 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. Stuck them in my MISTI, and I'm using the new Just Because background stamp. And I am going to stain this stamp heavily on its first use. Staining does not bother me. I'm just letting y'all know, though, that Archival inks will stain your photopolymer stamps. They'll stain anything, really. Archival inks are hefty. You don't necessarily need to use it for this. Kind of any waterproof style ink. And you could even experiment and stamp it with Oxide ink and see what happens. I wanted to keep the kind of the integrity of the words, yet I'm not going for perfection here. So I'm inking up the stamp with Vintage Photo Archival ink. And yeah, it's going to stain because this ink is permanent. You can use this to stamp on like non-porous surfaces, all that kind of stuff. Things that I don't do as a card maker, but there are places for it. But I just wanted to stamp it on the background, get those words there. And again, not worried about perfection, but I could have just inked it up and stamped it multiple times if I really wanted everything to be like super crisp. But again, this is background. So staining, you're going to see, because I'm going to show you guys. I don't show this very often, like, you know, cleaning my stamps, but this is what I use. I've talked about this in lives and shown it, but the Ultra Clean stamp cleaner, that is my ultimate go-to. I highly recommend this stuff. It will remove any residual ink. However, it cannot remove staining, but it will remove all the things. And then my other stamp cleaner is, I just use like the Brutus Monroe Squeaky Clean, because the Ultra Clean, if you've never worked with it, it has like almost like an oily residue, which I do not like, but it cleans real good. So when I use the Ultra Clean, which I only use with things like Archival, like when I really need to, you know, remove as much, I follow it up with the Squeaky Clean just to remove that residue, and we're good to go. And I use my little stamp scrubber. I'll have links to all these things. But that's my method. But you can see the stamp is now stained permanently. I'm okay with that. It'll be fine. So after I was done cleaning it, this is where we're gonna start getting inky. I've talked about this also in many videos. Surface matters, especially with ink smushing. So first, I smushed some Tumbled glass Distress Oxide ink onto my glass work surface, and you saw me spray it with water, and it just puddles. It doesn't bead up, you know, to get that texture look we like for ink smushing. This was intentional. One, to show it, and two, I wanted more of the look I was going for here. You know, not so much textured yet. We're going to add that. So I just pressed the Heavystock into that puddle of the Tumbled glass Oxide ink. And because Oxide inks, Distress Oxide inks, have pigments in them, the lighter colors like this will show up on darker cardstock. If I'd used just regular Tumbled glass Distress ink or other brands of like water-based dye inks, the lighter colors aren't really going to show up on dark cardstock. But if they have pigments in them, they will. So then the second thing I did was I took a stamp storage sleeve, any like clear packaging for the most part it'll work, but I keep this specific, this is my inky storage sleeve that I just keep beside me when I'm working, and I use it for doing things like this. You could also use a Kraft sheet. The bonus of using a storage sleeve or clear packaging is you can kind of see where you're placing your inky smushy bits. It helps for those of us that are a bit more control freaks, but at the same time, just like the great Tim Holt says, you get what you get and you don't throw a fit. So I'm using it though to add more texture instead of like the puddly, smushy looks. And I did the same thing with Vintage Photo Oxide ink. And because I stamped that background with Archival ink, you can see the letters aren't, blending or smearing or anything. They just stay the way they are. And I was drying between layers, so I get all of that texture going. And here's my backgrounds. And they're very warped because, I was adding water and spraying and heating and yada, yada, yada. You could just stick them under something heavy, leave them overnight, they'll be fine. Do I have that time or patience? No. So I use my Minc, and I've shown this in other videos as well. Stick it between a folded up piece of parchment paper, and I run it through my Minc, and it flattens it out just perfection. Makes it a little easier because I'm going to, adhere other things on top of it, etc. And the only time you do not want to run something through like your Minc or, a laminator, whatever you've got, is if you've done heat embossing. Like if I had heat embossed the background, do not run it through your Minc. That will melt, like remelt the embossing powder, and then the rollers, it'll be everywhere. Hot mess. Don't do that. Just nope. Same with if you have like any adhesive or anything like that. I only use this on like backgrounds that I've used just like ink, ink or paint. We're fine. And then I run it through and it's nice and flat. Or like I said, you could just pile it up under a couple of heavy books, leave it, it'll be fine. So my backgrounds are now flat. Now I can add all the other elements to them. So I pulled out the arching leaf border, which I've used in other videos. It's one of my faves. I die cut it from Simon's Smooth White Cardstock. And then the other die cut is the Rustic layering flower. This is one of the new ones. And of course I was like, oh yes, please love me some floral die cuts. And I stuck them to one of my big grip mats. And I'm using, again, Oxide inks. This time with my little picket fence pint-sized paper pouncers to add color. And legit, this isn't just me talking tongue-in-cheek. I am slapping the color on. Not worried about nothing. Don't even need to worry about a smooth blend, anything. Just get the color on there. Because we're going to add more ink smushing, all the things. And it's not going to matter. So I'll have, like always, the links to like the specific colors I use. But for the greenery, it was Bundled Sage, Peeled Paint, and Rustic Wilderness. And then I took the Rustic Wilderness, stuck it on my trusty little inky smushy sleeve, sprayed it with water, and then just pressed that in all around here and there. It's much more vibrant when it first goes down. And then because, again, oxides have pigments, they have that like almost chalky look to them. As it dries, it becomes a lot softer, but we still get all that fun texture. So once I was done with that, I just took these off the grip mat and just stuck them on a tray so they can fully dry. And so I can go on to the next element. Had to be careful with these big pieces because they're quite large and they're kind of delicate. But once they're dry, they'll be fine. And then, of course, we'll glue them down to the card fronts. So I did all of that. And then the florals, I die cut using that Rustic Layering Flower die set. Again, just from Smooth White Cardstock. And I'm using Mustard Seed, Wild Honey, and Crackling Campfire with my pint-sized paper pouncers to add the ink. I was really thinking like Brown-Eyed Susans. I just love like this time of year, and they're all, just like growing like literal weeds around here on the sides of the roads. They just make me happy, So that was the color inspiration for these. And just went kind of lightest to darkest. And I actually used the side of one of my little paper pouncers to kind of soften the blend. So it wasn't just like a circle of ink with some of these die cuts. So I added those 3 shades. And then for the flower centers, I used the Vintage Photo Oxide ink. And I'm also going to use Ground Espresso Oxide ink. And then I'll grab my little inky sleeve. Again, I don't know what else to call it. And smushed a little bit of the Crackling Campfire on that, sprayed it with water, and then press that onto all the florals to, again, create texture, love, and then let that dry. Wiped off my grip mat, and then after I did all of that, my brain stopped. I was like getting distracted looking at the florals. I was like, they're pretty. Anyway, everything is now dry, so I can start adhering it to those backgrounds. So I'm going to start with the big arching leaf border and just put liquid adhesive all along the back of it. Just on the larger areas, I don't cover the entire thing with adhesive. One, who's got time for that? And two, it's not necessary. You know, little parts of it are going to stick up. I'm fine with that because the bulk of it is adhered down. And then I just stuck them under a big acrylic block just to hold everything down, let the glue dry, and then I can go on to the next step, which is assembling the florals. With this set, you can kind of do whatever you want. So I ended up just adhering the two larger pieces together and then adding the flower centers. And then the smaller ones I had die cut just multiple times. It's all like all those pieces are all on one die, but I just put scraps under where the small flower was and I die cut extras to create just little flowers using that. So just kind of rotated them, adhered them together, and then same thing, added the little flower centers. So I'll have big flowers and small flowers. And then to adhere those, I'm going to add the stems from the set that I had inked up at the same time as I did all the other greenery. And if I was going to redo this, I should have added like different greens to the stems, because once they're adhered, after this was done, I was like, I could have just skipped adding the stems completely and just stuck the flowers down, because like the stems almost like fade into the rest of it because they're all the same color. I broke my own rule. I always say you got to mix up the greenery, like mix up the colors of greens you use, because it's not all the same and it looks different, you know, in nature. Plus it makes it easier to see, but hindsight 2020. Whatever. Still fine. Still cute. I'm happy with it. So after I adhered all that, I'm going to add splatter. Totally don't need to. You know, there's a lot of texture going on all the things, but this adds more. More is more. Hooray. I started with white gouache and I put it on my palette. I added some water to it to thin it out. And I have my backgrounds in my splat box. And I purposely went with gouache. It's going to look a little more white when I first splatter it, but because there's a fair bit of water added to this, it's just going to absorb a lot of those oxide inks that it's splattered on top of, and it's going to be a lot more subtle. So it's just going to create more texture, and I love it. I loves it. So it won't be quite so like harsh. And then after I did that, I'll rinse off my brush, and then I'm using my Gonzai Tombi Starry Colors, specifically the gold one in the middle that I use so much to the point where I've now hit pan on that, and it's getting a little harder to mix it up, but I'll keep using this until there's nothing left. So mix this up really well. With metallic watercolors, you do need to work the water in a fair bit to, you know, get that color moving, get all the shimmery goodness. So I did that and then splattered this fairly heavily all over the backgrounds, keeping the splatter more to where all the greenery and the florals were, and just kind of leaving the background as is, and let all of this dry, which didn't take very long. But while I was letting it dry, I did the die cutting for my sentiments. And I'm using the new Fancy You. It's called the Fancy You wafer die set. And I die cut it from smooth white cardstock, matte gold cardstock, and the outline I die cut from vellum. And I only layered one layer of the white cardstock underneath the matte gold. And then I'm adhering those pieces to the vellum outline. And then the final layer of white cardstock, I'm going to adhere to the back underneath the vellum. This is just going to make it easier to adhere the sentiment, because adhesive shows through vellum. It's kind of annoying. I don't like the unsightly like glue smudges. And it'll also pop the vellum up just a smidge, you know, so it kind of almost looks like it's floating. It just gives a little extra something. But the biggest reason I do it is it just makes it easier, because then all I have to do is add glue to the back of the cardstock, you know, portion of the word, and I don't have to be really careful on the vellum. So that's that on that. And then to complete the sentiment, I'm using, I think these are just called You sentiment strips. I'll have a link to them. I don't have a label for them. I'm for once doing a few things ahead of time. Shocker. But I think that's what they're called, is just You sentiment strips. And I trimmed down the ones I wanted to use and the word thank, so it'll say thank you. And I didn't want it to be harsh white, since I'm not having any other white showing other than that bit of splatter on the card fronts. So I just took Vintage Photo Distress ink, not Oxide, and a little blending brush, and added a smidge of that. Just, you know, just to tone down that little sentiment strip. And then I can adhere my die cut words. So you can see I can just apply adhesive to the cardstock. I don't even have to touch the vellum. So much easier. And then I can tuck that into place on my card front. And then I'll tuck in that little thank word. So it'll say thank you. So get that tucked into place. And then after I did that on the second card front, I'm going to go to my card base on the inside of my cards. My card bases are top folding A2 white note cards. I had left the background stamp in my MISTI, and I'm centering the card base so that I can stamp this on the inside of the card. I use some post-it tape right at the score line, my trusty piece of post-it tape that's still hanging on. I'll keep using it, same thing, till there's nothing left of it. And I'm inking up the background stamp with Simon's Latte Positively Saturated ink, just a very light pale brown, and this will dry back a little bit more too. And it's still kind of a lot for the inside of a card, but I will write right over this. You know, I love it. And I love the mix of fonts. I've talked about this. I'm a bit of a font snob, and I love fonts and, you know, combining different fonts and all the things. Anyway, stamp those on the inside of the cards. This was a lot easier to clean off because positively saturated inks, they're water-based. I just wiped the stamp off. It's good to go. So did that, and then adhered the second part of the sentiment from those sentiment strips that I trimmed out. So it'll say, the outside says thank you, and then the inside says for always being there. I adhered one of the extra flowers and the one little leaf cluster from the arching leaf border to the inside to finish it off. And then adhered my card fronts to the card base. I was going to leave it here, but I couldn't resist. There's a new little butterfly wafer die set, the Ooh La La butterflies it's called. What would also work if you have the flickering butterfly set that I've shown in a bajillion videos that I do. I've done this exact same thing with. That'll work great. These ones are just slightly bigger. So I was like, oh, I can combine both of them if I want. Because yeah, the flickering butterfly is a bit smaller. But anything will work, you know? Anyway, I die cut them from gold vellum. This is some tonic gold vellum. Another just must have in the craft stash, in my opinion, because it's very pretty. And I break my rule. With these, I break my rule. I add liquid adhesive and I don't cover it, you know, or conceal it in any way. I honestly, with these, I don't care. With tiny little butterflies, something so small, I don't care that you can just slightly. With the, you know, shimmery vellums like this, it's not as apparent as like with just regular vellum, but even then. But if it's really obvious, you could stick a little, you know, a little gemstone would work, you know, a little bit of bling just to cover it up if you wanted, but I've never bothered. I just stick it into place and call it a day. And that's exactly what I did. So I only add the adhesive right to where the body is. I kind of bend up the wings a bit. So again, it creates extra dimension, but because it's vellum, it's super thin. It doesn't create any bulk. And then I just got to let that glue dry, and these cards are complete. So lots going on, tons of inky texture and splatter and smushing and pouncing. And I had fun. I had ink absolutely everywhere. And I had fun doing it. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching. And like I mentioned in the intro, all the links to all the things will be in the description box below the video. If you just expand the description box, there's the supply list, links to all the supplies, link to my blog post. In the blog post, it's a little easier to navigate because I have like the photos and picture links and all the things. But yeah, all that'll be below for anyone who is interested. Thank you all so much for just hanging out with me. And I'll see you all very soon in the next video. Bye. Thank you so much to my amazing Patreon supporters. For anyone that might be interested in supporting me over on Patreon, the link to that is in the description box below the video. For everyone else, as always, thank you all so much for taking the time to watch my videos, for thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't. I'd love to have you. And here's a couple other videos for you to check out in case you missed them. Bye.